Have you been watching a lot of YouTube videos about birds and think they're cool? They are. And are you ready to run out and buy one? Well, before you do, take a breath and watch this video just to make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. Well, I'm Diana, and this is my bird, Larry Bird. He is about 20 years old, and he's a cockatiel. I've had him for about 10 years. So Larry Bird and I recently watched a documentary by the public broadcasting system, PBS, called Parrot Confidential. And we thought it was an extremely good documentary. And it highlights a big problem that exists where people tend to domesticate wild birds that probably should not be domesticated. Cockatiels are native birds of Australia, and many years ago, Australia stopped exporting cockatiels to the United States and to Europe. So all of the cockatiels that people can adopt or purchase in the United States came from the original cockatiels that were imported from Australia more than 50 years ago. Even though Larry Bird might have come from many generations of caged cockatiels, they are actually a wild species. Humans and dogs have evolved together for thousands of years. So dogs are actually extremely domesticated. But birds and other reptiles, even cats to an extent, are not as domesticated. So while we tend to have them as companion animals at home, they are essentially more or less wild animals. And so that's important to keep in mind. So anyway, I don't want this to be a really long video. I'm gonna do a series of little videos about what it takes to have a pet bird, because there are a lot. You gonna fly or you gonna poop? You gonna poop? Oh, Larry Bird! Oh, Larry Bird, what are you doing on my shoulder? So cockatiels are, you behaving yourself there? So in the 1970s, there was a very famous show called Beretta, where there was a guy who was a detective and he had a white cockatoo. And because of the popularity of that TV show, people went out and adopted all of these cockatoos, or actually not adopted them, they bought them. It created a market where people were illegally smuggling in cockatoos or just breeding them in really bad conditions and then selling them. The other problem was that people would just see the bird on TV, think it's really cool, and run out and buy a cockatoo. And so they would get the birds, realize that these birds were loud, that they needed a lot of attention, and after a couple years they would give the bird away. And because of that, there are these places that are basically overrun shelters for abandoned birds. It's really, really sad. Can you step down there? You like some of these? Look at those. Look how fun that is. And in this video, I'm going to talk about how loud Larry Bird can be. So even though Larry Bird is a little cockatiel, he actually has a very loud voice. In the morning, birds will instinctively call to each other. It's a time of a lot of socialization with other birds. And they'll yell at each other, and they'll call each other, and they'll communicate to each other where the food is. And it's a very social and active time for birds. The other time of the day that's pretty active tends to be when the sun is going down at dusk. So cockatiels and other parrots, and actually a lot of birds, will also socialize during that time because it's another feeding time. So for a lot of people who are brand new to having a pet bird, they might not know how active these birds are in the morning. So for about 3 or 4 hours every morning, starting around 7:30 or 8 a.m., Larry Bird starts making his instinctive flock calls. He'll chirp, he'll whistle, and that'll be very pleasant sounding, and sometimes he'll scream and yell. He'll scream and yell and try to get me into the room, A lot of time it's an instinctive flock calling. He'll do it for safety. So if you're a type of person who wants to run out and get a pet bird right away, but you prefer to sleep in, then maybe you might want to think a little bit or do some research into what types of birds make loud noises. If you live in a small apartment complex with thin walls, it's important to be conscientious of your neighbors. So I'm going to show a little video that I actually took this morning of Larry Bird making his instinctive flock calls, so you can see how loud he is, and always keep that in mind. Make noise every morning, don't you? Yes, because you're a good bird. If you have your heart set on getting a pet bird, please consider adopting a bird instead of purchasing a bird. There's just so many wonderful pet birds out there who have been given up to different animal shelters or to parrot sanctuaries. For whatever reason, the previous owner was not able to keep their pet bird. Sometimes it's moving. Sometimes the owners are elderly and get to the point in their life where they can no longer take care of an animal. And sometimes people will get a pet bird and not realize how much responsibility there is and give the bird away. There are wonderful birds out there that you can adopt. So definitely consider adopting a pet bird instead of purchasing one. To figure out how much maintenance it takes to have a pet bird, don't just run out and buy or adopt a pet bird. Why not consider volunteering at one of these organizations that shelters these birds? If you go and volunteer, you can really enrich the lives of these pet birds, and you can see how you are with the birds. Because maybe birds are not as cool as YouTube makes them to be, although I think they're just as cool as YouTube makes them to be. By volunteering at these shelters, you can find out if you're a bird person, and you can also find out what types of birds you like the best. And this is a great way to give back to the community and help out some birds that are in need. So I just wanted to throw those ideas out there, take them or leave them. So if you have any questions about adopting a pet bird or comments about what it's like for you to adopt a bird, please put them in the comments below.